The Symfony framework comes with a load of commands which you can access through the bin console script. What I like about them is that you can create little pieces of functionality without needing any kind of web browser or flashy user interface. Another benefit is that you can schedule automated processes to call them any time of night or day without needing any kind of human interaction. So in this recording, I'm going to show you how to create one of your own using a fairly realistic example. A little housekeeping before I start. I record in high resolution, so in order to have the best possible viewing experience, be sure to select high quality playback. And also, if you wish to be notified when I upload new recordings, you can do that by subscribing and clicking on the little notification icon. Throughout this recording, I'm going to be using the Symphony Binary. If you don't already have it installed, you can get it from the address which you see on your screen now. The Symphony documentation describes this as the best way to create new Symphony applications. As far as me and you are concerned, it's much easier for me to help you if you're using the same or a similar setup to the one which I'm using in the recording. So using that Symphony command now, I'm going to create a new project, which is as simple as doing this. Symphony new console commands demo is the name of the project, and the version option is saying I want to use Symphony version 5.1. So that's creating me my project. I shall move into there, and as we can see here, it's also set up a Git repo, and there's all our project files. First off, I'll explain what I'm going to create. So this is going to be a fairly typical e-commerce kind of scenario. I'm starting off with a spreadsheet of imaginary inventory from an imaginary supplier. I shall export this as a CSV file, and then using some kind of automated process, I'll be creating a console command to do it. I'm going to loop over the CSV. It's going to look for corresponding records in my database. If it finds them, it'll update them, and if it doesn't, it'll create new ones. I'll quickly start off by creating a command folder inside of the source folder, and then I'm going to add my class there, which I shall call update stock command, and this will extend command. And so this is the important bit. It has to extend this class in order for it to work. So that comes from Symphony component console command, and there's two methods from that parent that I'm going to override. One of them is configure and the other one is execute, and they do pretty much what they say on the tin. So the configure method is for setting up our configuration, and I'll show you what that means. So we're going to add a description, and that basically describes what our console command does. So we'll just keep it fairly simple. Update stock records, and then we can add arguments. So what do we need? I'm going to have a concept of markup. So we'll get a cost from the supplier, and then we're going to be able to mark it up by a given percentage. So the arguments for add argument are the name, whether it's optional or required. The third argument is the description, and the fourth argument is a default, which I'll set to 20%. Next, process date. We'll also make this optional, give it a description, and then what I want to do is pass in a date which is in this format, so years, months, days. And the way to do that in PHP is date create, which will create a new datetime object, and then I'm just going to format it as years, months, days. In order to have clarity on how this command is going to execute, I like to just write out the steps, basically sketch out my API exactly how I want this thing to work. So first step is convert CSV file into iterable PHP. Then I want to loop over the records. I'll update them if matching records are found in the database. If matching records aren't found in the database, then I'm going to create new records. So first things first, we need to get hold of the file. In order to do that, we need to have the file path. So I'll show you a nice little trick here using the services container. So I'll not go too deep into the service container in this recording, because I'll probably cover that in future recordings as it's a subject to itself. But I'm just going to show you a little trick where you can bind little bits of config to the container and have them available to your classes. So what I'm doing here is I'm making this project directory available to me wherever I add this or inject this into any of my constructors. So I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. So I'll add a constructor to my console command. Something to note here is that when you add a constructor to your console command, make sure that the parent construct goes after you've added all your properties. As you can see, all I've done is added that project variable which I defined in the services YAML file, and while I'm at the top here, I'm going to give the console command a name. You'll see why this is significant in just a second, because this is what we're going to use to actually trigger the command. And what I want to do is just dump out that project directory property which I just created. So Symfony console app::update stock, and there you have it. So that is our project directory, and because that's bound, that's now available for us to inject into any of our classes, which can be found inside of the source folder. What I want to do now is be able to grab that input file and loop over it. So here's the file path. What I'm going to do is grab the Symfony serializer pack, and using that I'll be able to decode a CSV file into associative arrays. So what we're looking for here is Symfony serializer pack, and in order to achieve what we want to achieve with just a couple of lines, we need to do this. Decoder equals new serializer. That takes a couple of arrays, one being normalizers, and the second array is encoders. So what we're using here is CSV encoder. That line is going to provide us with a serializer, but I've called it decoder because that's what I'm going to get it to do. So rows equals decoder decode. It takes a couple of arguments, one being the file content, which I'll get with file get contents, and the second argument being the format of the file. Before I go any further, I'll just dump that out to make sure everything's working okay. So I'll run the command again. Excellent. So what we have there is associative arrays which represent each line of the file. Obviously I don't want to hard code the date into this file path because I want it to be dynamic. So the way to get your arguments available to you in the execute method is to do this: input, which is input interface, get argument. And so what I'll do is just alter this file path to use the process date variable instead. The way that this will work is that suppliers all have their own folder where their inventory files get uploaded to, and then an automated process would run at the same time each day and just goes and finds a file for the given date. Before I go any further, I'm just going to spend a bit of time making this execute method a little easier on the eye, a little bit easier to read, so that another developer will be able to just come to it and just read it as a set of clearly defined steps. So I don't have to strip this code out of here, but I think it'll just make it a little bit more legible. So I'm going to create a new method where I'm going to place all of our decoding code into. By giving it a nice descriptive name such as get CSV rows as arrays, there can be no ambiguity as to what this actually does. I'll paste in the code now. So instead of assigning that to rows, I'm going to return it, and obviously I'm going to need to pass in the process date to make that available. And now I can strip out this code and things are starting to look a lot neater and tidier already, and I'll just call this supplier products. Another benefit of clearly defining your steps with well-named methods is that you can delete comments from your code which explain what things do, because they just add noise. Let's move on to the next step. What I need to do is loop over each of the supplier products, and then the first thing I'll do is update matching records if they are found in the database. So the first problem I can see with that is that I don't currently have a database. The way I'm going to add one is I'm going to use Docker and add a Postgres database as a service. Now you don't have to use Docker if you've got MySQL or Postgres already installed on your machine and that's what you're used to using, then obviously go ahead and do that. I now only have a few bits of developer software installed. I have Docker, PHP, Python, and Git and Composer, and that's it. I don't have any databases installed on my machine anymore. If you're not too familiar with Docker or Docker Compose, just check out my channel. I've done 1 or 2 lessons on the subject. Basically what I'm doing here is mapping ports on my host machine and volumes on my host machine to ones in a Docker container. If you are following along and you're also wishing to use Docker, then pay close attention to the service name, i.e. database, as that is a Symfony convention and that will make things work as default. Just going to add my Postgres environment variables, and then all I need to do is spin that up using Docker Compose up, and the -D means run this in detached mode. Docker Compose PS shows that it's up and running. What I want to do after that is then pull in Doctrine, which I can do using this command here, Symfony Composer rec rm, rec being a shortcut for require. That's installed, and I'm also going to pull in the maker bundle. Compose doesn't exist, but Composer does. Okay, and then so with this command here, Symfony console list, that lists all the commands available to you, and these are all the make ones which are now installed with that bundle which I just installed. And so this is a little helper for creating Symfony, or should I say Doctrine entities. And so the command is make entity and then your entity name. I'm going to call mine stock item. I'm just going to add a few fields, item number, which I'll actually make in string in case the supplier provides letters as well. Item name, string, 255, nullable, not nullable, should I say. Item description. So if you add a question mark, it tells you what all the different types are. So text, supplier cost. So this will map to the cost field in the CSV. And then one other, which will be my price. That'll be a decimal. And so I just hit enter again to complete that process. And here's my stock item entity. I don't normally encourage the use of automatic code generators and things like that, but I found that to be a solid tool for creating entities. Now I'm creating a migration to map to that entity. So I'll just tie this up a bit to make it a bit easier for you to read. All the fields there, no surprises. In order to make this into a table in the database, I need to do doctrine migrations migrate. I'm going to go and check that out using dbeaver. You can use whatever tool you prefer. And so just quickly running through this, there's my table and there's all the fields. So if you remember what we want to do here, we want to check if there's records already in the database, and if they are, we're going to update them. So in order to prove that works, I need to at least insert one record into the database. Take a note of the item number, supplier cost and price, because the supplier cost and price are the things that we expect to change once we run the process. In order to interact with the database, I'm going to need an entity manager. So I inject entity manager interface into the constructor. That will make the entity manager available to me inside this class. When I created the stock item entity, a stock item entity repository was also created for me automatically at the same time, and I'm going to use that to do a search for particular records. And all I'm going to do to locate records here is filter on the item number. So the item number in my database should match the same item number as the supply product. Here's something that I do quite often. I'm just doing a bit of type hinting in the comments, which helps with my auto completion, because it's not always easy to remember all the names of all these Doctrine and Symfony methods. So stock item repo, find by item number, supply product, item number. Let's put a quick little line in here just to dump that out, to see if anything's coming back from the database, and then over to the console, run the command again. Great stuff. There's one record coming back from the database, just what we want. Now what we want to do is add an if conditional. So if a record's found, we're going to update it. But update it with what, I hear you ask. So if you recall, when we did the configuration, we added this markup argument. My plan is to take the supplier cost and multiply it by a percentage markup. So that came as a percentage. In order to convert this into a decimal to make it easy to do in code, the best way I found to do that is just divide it by 100 and then add 1. And that should turn our 20 into 1.2, which makes it easy to multiply. And so, like I did before, I've got a bit of type hint in here. So I get a bit of auto-completion on my methods. Set supplier cost. So that will just be exactly the same as the cost that the supplier provides. And for the price, we're going to take that cost and multiply it by the markup. And again, I'm just going to add a little line to dump this out and go and check that everything's working as I would expect it to. Over to the console, run the command again. Call to member function, set supply cost on an array. Okay, I can see what I've done here. Find by actually returns an array. What I want to do is find one by. That should return me one item. And there we go. And if you look at the supplier cost, 30, and the price, which is the supplier cost multiplied by 1.2. Okay, let's persist this. This entity manager persist. Now I want to handle a scenario where a record isn't found in the database, so you're probably tempted to add on an else condition here. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to say continue on to the next iteration, which would find the next supplier product. What that does is it just limits the amount of conditionals found in the code and makes things a little bit cleaner. You'll see that in all of my recordings. I've sped things up a little bit there. There's all our fields complete. Just as I did before, what I want to do here is make the code a little easier to read by stripping out some of these lines and putting them in their own methods. So I'll give them nice clean names. Update stock item, create new stock item. Very easy for another developer to come along and know exactly what's going on here. Just makes your code a little easier to scan, and then if they need to know the actual details, then they can just dive into the methods to find those. Okay, what do we need to pass into this? We'll need supply product, so I'll add that. And then we'll do the same for our update method, just zooming through this a little bit. Paste that in. We'll need a supplier product to be passed in here also. And I've noticed that we're also going to need markup, so we'll add that to our update method and we'll add it to our create new stock item method. Make sure that our calls also have all the properties that they need. And I think we may be good to go. I'll strip out these comments because these are now redundant. You shouldn't need comments in your code to explain what's going on if you've used decent names. That's all looking clean. Just before I run this, I'm going to add some user feedback. So this Symfony style class takes the same arguments as the execute method, i.e. the input interface and output interface, and that'll just give us a bit of nice styling. So if we send a success message, it'll print it in green. We'll also return an exit code of 0. 0 basically means that it's worked. And we can do that using a class constant. So return command success. And all we need to do is go and run the command again. And we have an error. Undefined variable existing stock item, because we actually needed to pass existing stock item into our update stock item method. We'll add that, and I've also noticed that we didn't have entity manager flush, so nothing will be persisted to the database without that. Let's try it again. Okay, it's telling us that it worked. Let's see what's in the database. Okay, 4 records. The top 3 are our new ones, and the bottom one was our existing one. As you can see, the price and supplier cost have been updated. Let's improve that user feedback a little bit. We'll explain how many records have been updated and how many have been inserted. So existing count and new count both start with 0, and then we'll just increment if the update, and we'll increment for the new. So I'll just add a little message here to say how many have been updated and how many have been added. And this time round, I'm expecting it to tell me that 4 have been updated. There we go, perfect. 0 items have been added, 4 existing items have been updated. Make sure you check out the Symfony documentation for the full lowdown on what you can achieve with console commands. The documentation is excellent and there's a ton of features. I've really only scratched the surface in this recording. Also, what do you want to see me cover on Symfony Workshop? I'd love to hear from you, so please leave me a message in the comments down below. And if you want YouTube to show you more of my stuff, all you need to do is subscribe.